In the heart of 1930s America, when the economic crisis still cast a dark shadow over every street, in the port city of New Orleans, where muddy rivers spilled into the Gulf of Mexico, there was a man wrestling with his own fate. He was neither a general nor a renowned engineer, and certainly not a successful businessman. He was simply a shipbuilder, hot-tempered, stubborn, and seemingly fearless. His name was Andrew Jackson Higgins. Higgins was born in Nebraska, the arid plains of the Midwest, but he spent his life devoted to the water. In his youth, he had been expelled from school, gotten into fights with his bosses, and been labeled an impossible man to work with. Yet that fiery temper hid a mind full of daring ideas. Higgins believed that if someone said something was impossible, it simply meant they hadn't tried the right way, and he was always the first to prove them wrong. After losing his job in Nebraska, Higgins moved to New Orleans, a city of rivers and swamps stretching hundreds of miles. There he established a small workshop called Higgins Industries, building wooden boats for fishermen, oil drillers, and even bootleggers during Prohibition. At first, the workshop had only a few dozen workers, mostly local men, uneducated but skillful and seasoned with the water. They called their boss all sorts of nicknames: the madman, old wood, the cussing guy. And indeed, Higgins was like a storm in the workshop, rough, intense, but commanding respect. One morning, standing on the dock and watching a prototype boat run aground, Higgins snapped, "Hundreds of years, and no one has made a boat that can run in shallow water. Those engineers in Washington only know how to draw diagrams. They've never smelled the mud." Then he jumped into the water himself, measured the depth, and sketched a new hull design right onto a plank of wood with a carving knife. Instead of a flat bottom like ordinary boats, he made a shallow V-shaped hull, with a spoon-shaped bow to glide over the mud without sticking. He even recessed the propeller to prevent it from breaking when hitting the bottom. Simple as it was, no one had ever thought of it. A few months later, the first Eureka boat was born. Pinewood hull, gasoline engine mounted at the back, capable of running in deep rivers and shallow marshes alike. In tests, the boat shot through mud, climbed onto sandbanks, and backed off without damage. Higgins laughed heartily and declared, "This is the thing that will make the Louisiana swamps kneel." Before long, Eureka boats were bought by fishermen, oil workers, and even bootleggers during Prohibition. They became the perfect tool for anyone needing to navigate shallow water. Locals joked, "If there's mud, Higgins has a way." For him, it was a point of pride, not for the money, but for proving he was right. But behind the bravado was a man attuned to the times. Higgins saw war looming. In Europe, Hitler was conquering countries. In Asia, Japan was expanding into China. He believed it was only a matter of time before America was drawn in. And when that happened, small boats that could run in shallow water would not just be for fishing. In 1937, he heard about the Japanese using landing craft with bow ramps in the Battle of Shanghai. The news haunted him for months. He knew he held something the military had never imagined, a boat that could rush straight onto shore. But when he presented the idea to U.S. Navy officers, they only sneered. What could a civilian shipbuilder from the South possibly know about war? Furious, Higgins called them paper-pushing bureaucrats, returned to his workshop, and continued working his own way. He didn't need their belief, he just needed the chance to prove it. While major companies competed for defense contracts, Higgins quietly refined every detail of the Eureka boat, upgraded materials, improved engines, and trained his workers with military-style discipline, fast, precise, efficient. Many thought him mad, but in New Orleans, the madman earned respect. While unemployment plagued the country, Higgins' factory operated day and night. He hired women and black workers, rare at the time, because he believed talent had no color. He didn't speak of equality, only efficiency. If you can do the job, you get paid. That's it. And that philosophy created a rare, loyal workforce. Thus, Higgins gradually became a minor legend in the American South, a craftsman against the tide of time, rough but visionary. He didn't know that within a few years, those who laughed at him would line up at his factory gates, begging for those crazy boats to carry their troops across the sea. In the late afternoons, when the factory went quiet, Higgins would sit alone on the dock, gazing at the Mississippi flowing into the ocean. He'd puff thoughtfully on a cigar, squinting through the smoke, muttering, "One day these boats will go farther than anyone imagines." No one knew what he was thinking, but in Higgins' mind, the image of an amphibious army was already forming. He didn't dream of glory. He dreamed of a perfect design, a wooden machine capable of carrying men where water met land. The madman of New Orleans had no idea that within less than a decade, that dream would become reality, and his boats would pave the way for an army to storm Europe, writing one of the most crucial chapters in human history. In 1939, as smoke and fire began rising over Europe from Poland, the United States remained neutral. Yet along training bases on the coast, the U.S. Marine Corps was quietly preparing for what they called war on sea and land. Amphibious assaults on places without ports, where soldiers would have to step directly from boat onto sand under enemy fire. The problem? They had no way to do it. What the military had at the time were large wooden boats, flat-bottomed, slow, and prone to grounding. Upon reaching shore, soldiers had to climb over the sides, wade into water waist-deep, then slog through mud. A typical rehearsal ended with hundreds of soaked troops, ruined weapons, and a few broken legs before they even set foot on land. In Navy conference rooms, debates raged for months over the standard landing craft design, but all of it remained on paper. No one dared test it in reality. They needed someone willing to take a risk, and, by chance, Andrew Higgins was waiting for that opportunity. When the Marines heard about Higgins' Eureka boat, a vessel that could glide in shallow water and surge straight onto the shore without damaging the propeller, they decided to borrow one for a test. No contract, no budget, just let's see what makes it special. One spring morning in 1939, on the shore of Lake Pontchartrain, Higgins stood arms crossed beside his boat. Opposite him, a group of Marine officers leaned back, hands in pockets, eyes skeptical. One murmured, "This guy is a fishing boat builder, not a military engineer." Higgins heard it and merely smiled. He stepped onto the deck and shouted for the engine to start. The motor roared, the boat shot forward, cut through the waves, and charged straight on to the sandy shore. As the rudder touched land, Higgins leapt off, stumped the sand, and barked, "There! What more do you want?" No further explanation was needed. The officers were speechless. They had just seen what the Navy had never had, a boat that could transform from ship to vehicle in seconds.
Soon after, the Marines invited Higgins to compete in the official design trials against major contractors. The result? His Eureka boat beat them all. Faster, more maneuverable, and more resilient. Only one flaw remained. Soldiers still had to climb over the sides to disembark, slowing deployment. When officers pointed this out, Higgins didn't get defensive. He simply asked, "What if I make a door at the bow that can drop down?" One officer scoffed, "We've never seen that work in practice." Higgins replied, "Then let me show you." But Washington still didn't trust him. The Navy tended to choose large northern contractors with political ties and deep pockets. A small workshop owner from New Orleans, blunt and unorthodox, was an irritant to them. General Holland Smith, later called the father of modern amphibious warfare, recounted, "The Navy hated Higgins. They called him a troublemaker, but to us, the Marines, he was the only one who understood what we needed." Internal reports spelled it out. "We need a craft that can land troops and vehicles quickly, survive enemy fire, and leave the beach before being destroyed." No one knew how until Higgins appeared. In April 1941, upon reading intelligence about Japanese landing craft with bow ramps, Higgins felt like he struck gold. He pounded the desk, muttering, "If the Japanese can do it, I can too, and I'll do it better." Without waiting for approval, Higgins financed 3 prototypes himself. He cut steel, joined wood, welded every joint. Workers labored day and night. Higgins inspected every detail and even tested the ramp himself with a hammer. 2 weeks later, the first prototype was finished, an 11-meter wooden boat, V-shaped hull, flat bow, with a steel ramp at the front that could drop in just 2 seconds. He called it the LCVP, Landing Craft, Vehicle, Personnel. During the test, weather was foul, waves high. Navy officers suggested postponing. Higgins scowled. "War doesn't wait for good weather." The boat surged across the lake. Higgins sat at the bow, soaked cigar in mouth, glaring like he was daring nature itself. Reaching the opposite shore, he signaled the ramp to drop. Steel clanged down, water splashed, and 30 Marines stormed out, rifles in hand, in less than 10 seconds. Silence. Then one officer whispered, "God, that's it." From that moment, the fate of the U.S. Marines shifted. They had witnessed the miracle they had waited for years, a small craft that opened a whole new strategic horizon. Higgins wasn't just an inventor. He was a man who defied the entire bureaucratic system to bring his idea to life. While the Navy still debated, he had already built dozens and sent them to demonstrations across the country. In Washington, some generals called him a ranting lunatic. But in the Marine camps, whispers went, "If there's a war, we'll need him." And war came. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. As bombs shook the Pacific, America awoke. The military needed boats, lots of them. No one cared where Higgins came from or how foul-mouthed he was. The only thing that mattered was he had the one boat that could land troops on any shore in the world. Within weeks, the Navy sent him a massive contract. He immediately turned his small workshop into a wartime factory. Teams of craftsmen trained like soldiers, producing in 24-hour shifts. Locals called it the Wooden Fortress, where the madman and his ordinary workers prepared for a war they had never seen. And Higgins? When asked about it, he said simply, "I don't care what they call me. as long as my boats get American soldiers there and bring them back." In New Orleans, night fell, yet Higgins' factory lights stayed bright. Wooden hulls slid into the Mississippi, reflecting the moon on the water. Each boat bore a small inscription on the stern, "Made in New Orleans, USA." No one knew that in a few years those same boats would lower their ramps on the beaches of Normandy, Guadalcanal, and Tarawa, where history was written in wood and steel and the faith of a crazy shipbuilder who dared to challenge the world.
In the smoke-filled little office of Higgins Industries, Andrew Higgins was reading a translated Japanese military report. The article described landing craft that could lower a bow door, allowing troops and vehicles to pour onto the beach in seconds. He set the paper down, leaned back in his chair and muttered, "So they thought of that too." For years he had imagined that design, a boat that could carry full loads of men and vehicles, drive straight onto the sand, then open its bow like a fish's mouth to spit warriors onto the front line. But now he had no time for daydreams. War in Europe had erupted fiercely, and America was being drawn in. Without waiting for military approval, Higgins put up his own money and got to work. He gathered his engineers, shipwrights, mechanics, and even a few college students who hadn't yet graduated, and declared, "We have 3 weeks. Build me a boat that can drop its bow, take the seas, take hits, and not die." They looked at one another in disbelief, but when Higgins spoke, nobody argued. Day and night the shop rang with hammers, saws, and the smell of pine resin. Planks were joined, thin steel plates welded, and finally a crude prototype emerged, about 11 meters long, a flat bottom, thick wooden planking, and a stout diesel engine. At the bow hung a steel ramp that could be lowered by cable. Simple, but brilliant. It combined full-craft techniques with the intuition of a man who'd spent his life on the water. Higgins didn't produce elaborate blueprints. He pointed, nodded, and let the craftsman build by feel. When the prototype was finished, many remained skeptical. A few Navy officers came to look and whispered, "There's no way this wooden boat will survive heavy seas, much less lower its bow into the surf." But Higgins said little. "Just watch," he told them. On the morning of the trial, the wind blew hard across Lake Pontchartrain. A group of Marine officers, reporters, and shipyard workers lined the shore. The wooden craft, the word Eureka faded on its hull, coughed to life, roared and accelerated. It ran like an arrow across the water, white spray flinging to either side. A few meters from the beach, it didn't slow. Thud, the bow punched into the sand and the hull held. Immediately the steel ramp dropped, and 36 Marines jumped off, rifles in hand, streaming out in formation as if in combat. The whole operation took less than 10 seconds. The crowd was stunned for a few heartbeats, then erupted in cheers. One officer turned to Higgins, eyes equal parts astonished and admiring. "God, you did it!" Higgins merely curled his lip and exhaled a cloud of smoke. "I told you, we don't need fancy things, only what works." Word of the test spread fast. Soon the Navy and the Marines placed orders. The craft was officially named the LCVP, Landing Craft, Vehicle, Personnel, but to American soldiers it acquired a simpler name, the Higgins Boat. Unlike complex military prototypes, the LCVP was a marvel of simplicity. Cheap but sturdy wooden hulls, a flat bottom to beach on shallow sand, a bow ramp that dropped in seconds by hand crank or motor. It could carry 36 fully armed troops, a jeep, or 2 tons of cargo.
Troops rushed forward through the bow instead of clambering over the sides, reducing the risk of getting stuck or being shot while disembarking. When the run was over, the boat backed off immediately to fetch the next wave. More importantly, Higgins' design allowed mass production. No huge steel works or special technology were necessary, just timber, nails, and skilled hands. Those seemingly ordinary elements became the key to total war. When the report reached higher command, General Holland Howlin' Mad Smith ordered deployment at once. He said, "This is the craft we need to win the war. Without it, we can't land anywhere." And he was right. While strategists sketched maps and calculated campaigns in Europe and the Pacific, in New Orleans, Higgins already held the missing piece of victory. From a sketch on a shop floor, that wooden boat was about to slide out into the ocean and become an emblem of the conflict. Higgins did not know that in a few years, thousands of identical craft would lower their ramps on the beaches of Normandy, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, places the world would forever remember as gateways to freedom. There, in the oil and sawdust-scented workshop, he stared at the boat resting on its cradle and smiled. All right, now they'll know a man from New Orleans can change a war.
Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. News of the Japanese attack shook the entire United States awake. While millions of young Americans eagerly enlisted, in New Orleans, Andrew Jackson Higgins leapt from his desk, flung his cigar butt to the floor, and bellowed, "All right, now they need me!" From a small wooden workshop that once built boats only for fishermen, Higgins Industries suddenly became the focal point of an arms race. The U.S. Navy needed thousands of landing craft, and they knew of only one man who could deliver. Higgins accepted the task without hesitation. When officials asked, "How long will you need to scale up production?" he just smiled. "Not long. I've spent my whole life preparing for this." And indeed, from that moment, New Orleans transformed into a living industrial machine. The small workshop on the banks of the Mississippi expanded tenfold. Empty plots along the river were soon filled with massive factories, gleaming tin roofs, and thousands of workers streaming in and out around the clock. Higgins didn't just build a factory, he built a system. Training schools for craftsmen, housing for workers, cafeterias, medical facilities, and even small playgrounds for children. At a time when much of America, especially the South, was still mired in racial discrimination and inequality, Higgins acted in complete opposition. He hired everyone, men, women, white, black, Native American, immigrants, even people with disabilities. All worked side by side, ate at the same tables, and received equal pay. A journalist once asked him, "Don't you worry about trouble? This is the South, you know." Higgins shrugged. "I don't hire by clerk. I hire by hands, and every hand can hold a hammer." That spirit created a miracle. In less than 2 years, Higgins Industries grew from 75 employees to over 20,000. The factory ran 24/7, assembly lines humming like the heartbeat of America itself. When the whistle blew, hundreds of craftsmen changed shifts. Steel doors opened, planks, engines, and bolts were moved into place, and one by one, Higgins Boats were born. At first, each boat took weeks to complete, but Higgins wouldn't tolerate slowness. Having been a construction contractor, he knew how to break work into precise steps. He applied that assembly line thinking to shipbuilding, a concept no one had dared try.
Instead of a single team handling all tasks, Higgins divided production into hundreds of small operations: cutting, assembling, welding, painting, installing engines, and testing. While one boat was being painted, the next was being welded, another transported to the dock. Every 20 minutes, a new boat launched. Navy engineers visiting the factory were awestruck. One exclaimed, "This is no longer a shipyard, this is a victory factory." During the war years, Higgins Industries produced not only LCVPs, but also heavy landing craft LCMs, PT boats, supply vessels, floating docks, and countless other naval craft. In total, over 20,000 vessels were built on the banks of the Mississippi, more than all other shipyards combined. Amazingly, it was all done with everyday materials: wood, light steel, oil-based paint, and cable. Higgins understood that war wasn't just about sophisticated blueprints, but a race for output and speed. He once said in a meeting, "The Germans have good engineers, but we have skilled workers. If they build one boat in a month, I'll build 10. Life magazine dubbed him the Henry Ford of war, while General Dwight Eisenhower, who would later command D-Day, described Higgins as the man who turned the impossible into reality. Indeed, as America strained to fight on two fronts, these public factories in New Orleans became the heartbeat of the wartime industry. Amid welding sparks and hammer strikes, one could hear a sound louder than any national anthem, the sound of belief that ordinary people could help save the world. Women who had been teachers, secretaries, or homemakers now donned overalls and helmets, hammering and painting ships. Men who had faced racial discrimination were recognized, paid fairly, and respected as heroes. Some said, in New Orleans, Higgins didn't just build boats, he built a small society where everyone mattered. In 1943, when President Roosevelt learned that a private Southern factory was hiring thousands of black workers and women at the same pay as men, he laughed and told Eleanor, "Go see Higgins' little city. Maybe he's showing us the future of America." And Eleanor Roosevelt did go. She walked among the assembly lines, through thousands of sweating workers, past freshly painted hulls sliding into the water. Later, she wrote in her diary, "If America had a few more like Higgins, victory would only be a matter of time." But for Higgins, victory was never the only goal. In an interview, he said, "I don't fight for money. I fight because I hate slowness, bureaucracy, and the word impossible people have said to me all my life." Every vessel from his factory was more than wood and steel. It was a symbol of stubbornness, of faith in the power of ordinary people. From New Orleans, Higgins boats crossed oceans to every battlefield on Earth. They carried the hopes of millions and paved the way for thousands of American soldiers to step onto distant shores where freedom was at stake.
Early on the morning of June 6, 1944, the English Channel lay shrouded in cold mist, its frothy waves crashing onto the beaches of Normandy, water surging over rocks, gray and violent. On the sand, thousands of American, British, and Canadian soldiers stood in silence, listening to the roar of the sea and the whistles of the landing craft. In that moment, everyone knew a storm was about to break, but not a storm of weather, a storm of war, where freedom itself would be decided. Yet not everyone realized that the key to unlocking freedom lay in those small, unassuming wooden boats sent from New Orleans by Andrew Higgins, thousands at a time. The LCVPs, the Higgins Boats, were more than mere transport. They carried hope, carried destiny, carried dreams of returning home in peace. Each roughly 10-meter craft rumbled as its Ford six-cylinder engine roared, carrying 36 soldiers crouched low, rifles pressed to their chests, packs heavy on their shoulders, eyes fixed on the mine-strewn sand and anti-tank obstacles. Like every vessel before it leaving the workshop, each LCVP was designed to launch quickly, withstand waves, and drop its bow ramp so troops could disembark in seconds. The moment they surged onto the beach, the boats seemed to perform a kind of magic. Wood and steel scraped the waves, steel mesh and sand flew. Soldiers leapt out, guns and grenades ready, eyes burning with determination. Behind them, Higgins Boats withdrew swiftly, returning to the motherships to carry the next wave of troops, like the steady heartbeat of the battle itself. American generals later acknowledged, without Higgins Boats, D-Day would not have succeeded. Heavy, slow vessels would have left soldiers dead on the beach before they could deploy, but with these wooden crafts, they could reach the sand, stand up, and fight. A simple tool, yet so effective that each boat represented life itself, each trip an opportunity for freedom. Stories of D-Day would later focus not only on tactics, artillery, or air power. They told of the New Orleans boats, the anonymous shipyard workers, and Andrew Higgins, who turned a small woodshop into the center of a wartime miracle. An American doctor watching the landings remarked, "Those boats didn't just bring soldiers to the beach, they brought freedom to all of Europe." Beneath Normandy's sand, thousands of American, British, and Canadian soldiers fell. Yet thanks to Higgins' boats, thousands more pressed forward. Every boat that withdrew carried a chance for survival, a small victory, until all of Europe awoke to renewed hope. When the war ended, the Higgins boats did not vanish. They were used in subsequent conflicts, from Korea to Vietnam, proving that civilian innovation and faith in ordinary people could change the course of history. Naval museums worldwide still display them, a reminder that freedom never arrives from waiting. It comes from hands that create miracles. And Andrew Higgins, the blunt, stubborn shipbuilder, remains a symbol. The man who taught all of America that a wild idea, executed with belief and relentless effort, can, indeed, change the world. New Orleans, once an ordinary port city, is now remembered as the cradle of the boats that delivered freedom. A place where a shipwright turned wood and steel into hope, transforming the dream of victory into reality. History remembers there are moments when even the smallest vessels can pull all of humanity out of darkness.